Hello and welcome to the History of Japanese Board Gaming during PAX Online. My name is Sarah Winters. I've taught this panel at both PAX East and West in previous years, but this version of this panel is going to have one significant change. Well, two. First, it's going to be considerably shorter. This is only a half-hour time slot from 15 to 45. So I'm going to be rushing through a few things, and unfortunately I've had to cut some of my favorite, more esoteric games. But two, this panel is going to be focusing on games that can be played via social distancing. So here are my criteria. The game must either be A, playable online via the official developer's software or Steam or some other official source, so no tabletop sim mods. I'd like the developers to be able to see a cut of their game. Two, that the game is old enough. We're talking things like Go and Shogi, where there's plenty of different online options available to you. Nobody owns Go or Shogi, so these games are available from freely online. Or three, the game can be played as a two-player game, therefore social distancing, or it can be played online where someone owns a physical copy and either moderates it or runs the game with a camera where they can show others. So unfortunately, games with hidden roll mechanics or hidden hands, unless they have a Steam variant or an online variant that you can play supporting the developer, unfortunately those versions have to have been cut. That being said, we have a lot of games that are still available to us. Now, I've recorded some footage, thanks to Kebabs, that's at Kebabs on Twitter, and he's my significant other, and thankfully recorded a lot of awesome footage for us from the Nintendo 41 Clubhouse games, which actually includes most of the games on this list, almost all of the historical games, and even one of the modern ones. So here's what we're going to cover as far as the historical games are concerned, and I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the time periods within them, where it's relevant to the time period. For example, the invention of printing was a huge leap forward for board gaming in Japan, and changed how some of these games were played. So we're going to be starting from the Asuka time period and going all the way to the Taisho and Showa period before jumping to modern day games. Before we do that, though, I have some terminology I'd like to discuss. Now, as you can see in the corner, for those of you who can, there's just an image of me here. Unfortunately, I don't have a video camera, and I myself am legally blind, so I figured it didn't make any sense for you to watch me not be able to focus on a camera. And as such, I also understand if you can't read the PowerPoint on the screen. So whenever there's relevant information, I'm going to make sure to read it out. Most of the PowerPoint slides have minimal text on them, or text that is just flavor that you can read while you're listening to me speak about the more key details. That being said, there's some key terminology I'd like to cover first before we step into these games, so that I don't have to go back through it as the panel continues. Now also, if you would like a copy of these slides, I will have my Twitter up at the end, and I will be happy to share these slides with you, as well as the longer version of this panel that normally lasts about an hour. Terminology. First, we have abstract games. A lot of ancient games from around the world fit into this category. These are games that lack theme. It's better to give you some examples, and then you'd immediately know what kinds of games I'm talking about. Things like chess and checkers, Go, Shogi, Gomoku, and Renju all fit into this category. Next, another common ancient game. Most of these are card games, although some of them are dice or tile games. These are trick-taking games. These are games where one tries to rack up points by a predetermined matching or scoring system. Again, usually card games. Euchre, hearts, cribbage all fall under this category. Most Japanese karata games, and we'll be talking about karata later, like koi koi, as well as Nichi Mahjong. all fit into this, as well as the modern game of President or Tycoon, which we will be discussing in the modern round. Last but not least, our ancient games. There is one dexterity game that I will be covering. These are games where physical skill, such as sacking or flipping, determine one's ability to do well or win. The most well-known Western game that fits in this category would be Jenga. We will be talking about Menkel. As far as our modern games are concerned, there's 3 additional categories that I'd like to discuss. These are deck-building games, hidden role games, and press-your-luck mechanics. Deck-building games are games that focus on expanding a personal deck of cards that determine what you do on your turn. Western examples would be Dominion or Clank. We will be talking about trains when we talk about modern games. Hidden role games are games where you have a secret role, and that determines what you can or can't do on your turn. Usually these games' goal is to try to figure out what other people's roles actually are. Common well-known Western games are Coup, Masquerade, and Werewolf. We'll actually be talking about Love Letter, which surprises people when they discover that it is a Japanese game. Last but not least, press your luck mechanics. Earlier mentioned Koi Koi does thrive on press your luck mechanics, but we'll also we would normally be covering Welcome to the Dungeon, but unfortunately in this panel it had to be cut because it doesn't fit any of our criteria. If you want to read my longer panel that includes it and a few other panels, games besides, I'm happy to share those with you. But we're going to be jumping straight into early history to the Asuka period. This was a period where there was a lot of exchange between Korea and Japan. Buddhism came to Japan from China via Korea, and it's the start of direct influence from China through that peninsula and trade. And that also brought with it one of the earliest examples of Japanese games, which is Go, which is not actually a Japanese game, but Chinese, otherwise known as Eagle. It was developed in the Zhou dynasty, which was 1000 to 200 BCE, brought to Korea, and then it was brought from Korea to Japan along with Buddhism, writing, and many other things. Now Go, on these next few slides, I'm going to be showing you some Go moves and the general strategy. This is actually not a game that I am particularly familiar with. I actually am much more familiar with Japanese card games, especially Koi Koi. Go is a master strategy game. Whereas chess is considered a battle, Go is often considered an entire war. Go pieces have no strength or weakness to one another, like chess pieces do. All Go pieces are considered of equal importance. They don't have any special moves. The only things you can do on your turn is place a piece. And your goal is to surround as much territory as possible. Yes, you can capture opponents' pieces in the process, but the goal is not necessarily capture, just simply terrain control. And the screen here shows some examples of how you control the terrain on the board. There are many ways to play Go online. There are online Go communities. There are plenty of online Go applications that you can play, both in a browser and as a purchasable program for computers or most forms of consoles. We're now going to be moving forward to the Heian period, which is 800 to 1100 AD. This was a period of great peace and a period of great stability, and with it we bring Gomoku, which is actually Japan's first native board game. Interestingly enough, yes, this does look like Go, just on a smaller board. It is not Go. It is a completely different game, played with the same Go pieces and either an actual Go board or a smaller version of it. I like to describe it as the world's most complicated game of tic-tac-toe. Now, Black plays first and has advantage. If anybody of you plays tic-tac-toe, you're probably very familiar with this, that whoever gets to go first usually has statistical advantage to win. We'll actually be coming back to Gomoku later, because there is a variant of it that was developed later in Japanese history that erases black's advantage, making the game completely equal and a much more interesting strategic game. Now, Gomoku is available online, even the basics or the advanced version, which I'll be discussing later, and as well as it's included in the Nintendo Classic board game classics that I discussed earlier. We're then going to be jumping straight ahead to the 1500s in Karuta, and the time period is very important here because two key things happened. One is woodblock printing became much more widely available, and two, the introduction of the Dutch to southern Japan and Dutch trade. And the Dutch brought with them tarot, which were the original playing cards. Now, Japanese playing cards were based loosely, or tightly in some cases, off of these Portuguese playing cards. Many regional variants were created. We can see 4 examples here, and you'll notice that they all contain different numbers and quantities of cards, not just like, for example, the Usuns. These have 5 suits. Now, Hanafuda is the most well known. A lot of these, unfortunately, faded in popularity, either because they were banned for being gambling, banned for being foreign if they actually looked too close to the Portuguese types. But Hanafuda did persist. Now, Hanafuda is not a game. It is a type of card in the same way that our standard 52 card deck is a type of card. They're called trump cards. The games you play with them are things like poker or blackjack or whatever else, but the cards themselves are not a game. Hanafuda is the same, although the most popular version game played with Hanafuda is called Koi Koi. Koi Koi is a trick-taking game where your goal is to score a lot of points by matching cards on the board. And as you can see here, for those of you who can, the cards here are actually the Nintendo variants. Nintendo was originally a playing card maker before they made video games, and you can actually buy Nintendo branded Hanafuda and trump cards even today. They also still make Go boards as well. The next 2 slides are actually going to be pulled directly from the Nintendo game, where they include a short cheat sheet so that you can see what sets, sort of like hands in poker, there are, but also how much they're worth. Not every hand is worth the same amount of points. It's not like in poker where if someone has a 3 of a kind, it's just better than a 2 of a kind. Well, board your butterflies, which is worth 5 points, isn't better than poetry slips, which is worth 1 point. Just getting a hand is enough to win the game. But how many points you win is based on how good your hand is. So here is a quick example of a game in play. You have a hand of cards. There's a communal deck in front of you, but then you can actually see what cards you, in this case this was me, or kebabs down here, what cards we've actually already put out. So when you start making your matches and your hands, you can tell what your opponent is attempting to go for. So you can either try to deny them, like I'm halfway to moon viewing, you could try to deny my ability to get moon viewing, or you could say, well, they've already got the moon, it's not worth it to go for any of the other parts, and try to score something else. Because Hanafuda does not have any duplicates. Once somebody has a card, you know that another one is not going to appear for the rest of the game. The other key point to remember in Koi Koi is that once you've made a full set, what's interesting is that you can choose to call Koi Koi or not. In this case, Kebabs chose to not call Koi Koi. What that means is you can say that you want to keep playing, even though you have a hand that's valid. If you do that, you immediately end the game and score whatever points you scored. If you choose not to call and keep playing, If your opponent scores something, then they can get your points and theirs, as you just saw in this example. There's also e awase karuta, which are a little bit different. These are games often played on New Year's, and they include poetry snippets, beginnings and ends, or in the case of iroha karuta, letters of the Japanese syllabary, as it's not an actual alphabet. You can play Eowase Karuta online. It is a straight matching game where your goal is to find the second half of a piece of poetry when the first half is read aloud. It is a game of speed and a game of dexterity as you try to find the missing piece. Moving on to the Edo period. It was the end of the Civil War and a period of massive economic growth, but also a period of isolationism. But it was because of the end of the Civil War, people had a lot more time for leisure. And we see Shogi, which is the other most well-known Japanese game. Shogi is very similar to chess and yet very different. In that there are 8 different types of pieces in Shogi. You have your pawns, 8 for each side, just like in chess, but where it gets interesting is the rest of the pieces. You have 2 knights, 2 lancers, gold, a silver, a rook, a bishop, and a king, no queen. And each of the pieces moves vastly differently from one another. There's a little map here of how all the pieces move, but what's most interesting is you'll see that there are red and black pieces. These are not your and your opponent's pieces. These are your pieces, and they flip over. When you're able to move a piece to the opposite side of the board, unlike in chess, each piece, with the exception of the gold and the king, promote to something else. The knight, the lance, and the silver all promote to gold and gain additional movement in different directions. The pawn advances to sort of like a super pawn. But what's most interesting is the one bishop and 1 rook that you have advance to a sort of super bishop or super rook, the dragon versions, that can move mostly but not quite exactly like a queen would. They do have some restrictions. What's also interesting about Shogi is that instead of moving on your turn, if you have captured an opponent's piece, you can put it on the board your direction facing your way. Again, this is why the pieces aren't colored like they would be in chess, because you can take your opponent's pieces that you've stolen and play them on your side of the board. This means that capturing an enemy piece doesn't remove it from play. It transfers the power from one to another. I've been in games where where the pawns become much more important, although they can only move forwards. They cannot capture sideways. They can only capture directly in front of them. They can act as a blockade when you've caught a lot of your enemy pawns, dropping one down on the board just to prevent your opponent's piece from moving. I much prefer Shogi to chess, but I am terrible at it. Now, there is one other game we're going to be talking about during the Edo period, and we're going to be taking a totally radical tangent about pogs. Well, actually, what we're going to be taking a tangent about is Menkel. Again, like I said, with the advancement of printing in Japan, especially woodblock printing, beautiful, colored, various shaped Menkel, which are like pog pieces, were created. In the same way as pogs, your goal is in this dexterity game is to flip over your opponent's cards or chips. They can be any shape, though, unlike the pogs that we see in the US, which were only round. And starting in the 1980s, just like how there were hollow foil pogs, there were hollow foil Menkel. These Pokemon cards that I have here are not Pokemon trading cards, they are Menkel. They are thick cardboard-like cardstock, very shiny, still being able to be bought today. And people would play Menkel with this. Now, how did Menkel become Pogs? Are they really the same thing? They are. I'll give you the shortest version of this story. Essentially, in Hawaii, Menkel were brought to the area. A local school teacher noticed kids playing with them. especially using POG, pomegranate, orange, guava, passion fruit, orange guava, juice caps, back when juice used bottle caps, to play the game, hence the round caps. The Canadian Manufacturing Company was called in to make more of them. The school teacher proliferated the game to teach math, and there you have it, the POG craze of the 90s. All started by a school teacher. Now, while POGs have sort of faded into obscurity, Menkel is still played today in much of the East Asian world. And this is from the radical year of 97. 1897. A woodblock print by Shuntei Miyagawa. Some things never change. Moving along to the Meiji period, with the integration of the West, we also have an integration of Renju. This is Gomoku, yet again, grown up. Gomoku with centuries of house rules added to remove first player advantage. Again, first player in Renju or Gomoku is the black pieces, hence the terminology. 20 countries are part of the Renju International Foundation, and in all of the years that it has existed, America has never won a tournament. Now, if you want to play Renju in most versions that have Gomoku, these are the settings that you are going to need to have in order to be able to do so. First move is obviously first player, but then there's going to be 3 rules you need to look for. They're called 3 and 3, 4 and 4, and overline. If you allow these, you're playing Gomoku. If you forbid these for the first player, you're playing Renju, because these are the 3 handicaps you need. And here is a short video of this in action. So, the person who's playing black has the red cursor, and you'll notice as things going down, eventually red will actually have periods where there's a little no symbol. This is because the black player is forbidden from making certain moves in order to keep the game fair. This makes the game much more strategic and a much closer match than normal Gomoku. 3 and 3 and 4 and 4 basically means that you cannot combine 2 sets of 3 with a middle piece, or 2 sets of 4 with a middle piece, to make a longer line later. Only the first player has this disadvantage. Moving on to Taisho and the early Showa period, we have our final, what I would consider historical Japanese game, and that's Nichi Mahjong. Well, again, Mahjong, like Go, is a Chinese game brought over to Japan. Richi Mahjong is a Japanese variant of a Chinese game. It is a 4-player trick-taking tile game where your goal is to make a hand of 14 tiles. Now, what constitutes a hand varies wildly. I have on the screen many different possible hands. There are 14 pages of hands here and over 30 possibilities. Essentially, your goal is to pick up a tile on your turn and to deposit one into the centralized board. Other people can choose to take the tile that you've just discarded if it will help them make a match. And your goal is to be the first person to make a match, and not just make one. Like in Koi Koi, different hands are actually worth different amounts of points, and you take these points away from the people who didn't make a hand. Now, I've got 7 minutes left, so let's go through the modern game lightning round. Again, all of these games have to fit the categories that I'd mentioned earlier. And first up is Deep Sea Adventure and a few of the Oink games. While my personal favorite, Startups, does not fit this criteria because there's hidden information, Deep Sea Adventure has hidden information, but it's information that's hidden from everyone until the end of the game. So it is possible to play with one person owning the game, using a video camera to share it with everybody else, and everybody else using an online dice roller app to play and take their turns, with the one person who owns the game managing the board for everyone. Another game that's possible to play via this method would be a Fake Artist Goes to New York, which is a hilarious drawing game. The only problem is if you're playing it remotely, the person who owns a physical copy of the game has to play as a moderator and cannot actually participate because they'll know who is or isn't the fake artist. The same would be said with a few of their other hidden role games, as long as someone can play as a moderator. Next is Daifugo. And as a huge Persona fan, it was interesting to see this added into Persona 5 Royal. So yes, you can in fact play this there, although only against other CPUs. Daifugo, or President, or Tycoon, depending on who you're speaking to, is a trick-taking game where your goal is to dump your hand as fast as possible, and you earn more points based on how quickly you're able to discard all of your cards. It's almost like a reverse Crazy Eights. Certain cards have special rules, such as the Three of Spades being better than a Joker. The 8 card clears the board, either called an 8 clear or an 8 stop. And there's a good bit of strategy in determining when you want to discard your cards. But what's most interesting about President or Tycoon is what happens after the game is over. You don't just play one round, you play several. And depending on the order in which you're able to discard all your cards determines how powerful you are the next go around. The person who goes first is now the President or the Tycoon or the Daifugo, and they get to discard their 2 junkiest cards to the person who's fourth. The person who's fourth, meanwhile, as you can see here, must give their 2 best cards to the President. The 2 people in the middle have to trade 1 card each to each other. So not only is it a game of strategically getting rid of your cards on the table, it's also a game of doing so quickly so that you're able to maintain your streak in the next game. Love Letter is another game that surprises a lot of people. Love Letter is available here at Board Game Arena. You pay a small fee to be able to play it, or you can buy it outright on Steam and play with friends virtually. It is a hidden role game where you're trying to get a love letter to the princess and figure out who the princess is by deducing their various roles. Machi Koro is also available online, and it is available for free. Yukata, a German online board game site, actually acquired the license to allow people to play it online for free. So this is a legitimate way to play Machi Koro online. It is a fun party risk-taking game involving rolling dice. Now, I'm running out of time here, so I'm going to speed through the last one, which is Trains, which slides in on a technicality that the official Trains website offers a free-to-play PDF version of the game for 2 players. So that's a good place to check it out if you want to get interested. It is a really cool deck-building game. Now, I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to say my quick goodbyes. I'm at Division 10 on Twitter if you want the slides, if you want the longer slides, if you want to see the longer presentation, or if you have any questions for me, feel free to shoot them my way. Again, thank you for stopping by. I'm sorry I couldn't spend more time with you, and have a wonderful PAX.